At 6:42 p.m., on a warm April evening in 1978, the last image anyone would ever see of 17-year-old Lori Jean Moss was a blur in the rearview mirror denim cutoffs, thumb outstretched, hair tangled in the golden Florida light. She was standing at the edge of Highway 301 near Ocala, a stretch of asphalt that shimmered like molten steel, cracked with heat and silence. Just minutes later, she vanished. No scream, no skid marks, no body. Just a whisper that would grow louder with time that Lori had been taken by men on motorcycles, their leather jackets glinting with patches, their engines humming like distant thunder. In a place where freedom and danger often ride side by side, one question remains, haunting and unanswered. Did Lori slip into the arms of death willingly? Or was she dragged? The rumors began almost instantly, a wildfire of speculation igniting in truck stops and diners along the route Lori disappeared. People said they had seen her, or someone like her, climbing onto the back of a cherry-red Harley with a man whose beard touched his chest and whose eyes never blinked. Others swore she was spotted 2 days later, barefoot and dazed at a gas station in Gainesville, only to vanish again before police could arrive. But every sighting was chased by smoke and shadow, offering no answers, only more confusion. There was talk of a biker gang known as the Steel Vultures, a nomadic tribe with a reputation for riding fast, living hard, and leaving no witnesses. They were ghosts with engines, legends stitched into the rumor mill of rural Florida. Some said Lori had been with them voluntarily, chasing freedom and rebellion. Others whispered darker things, about initiation rites, about girls who were never seen again. Lori's mother, Carol Moss, sat on the edge of her worn corduroy couch for days, blank-eyed and unmoving, clutching a school photo of Lori that had curled at the edges over time. Her daughter had disappeared days before the prom, the dress still hanging untouched in her closet. Pale blue chiffon, with a satin bow, a whisper of innocence in a world that had turned suddenly savage. Carol called the police, local news, even a private investigator from Tampa who specialized in missing persons, though what he found or didn't gnaw deeper than the silence itself. No one had seen Lori board a motorcycle. No one had heard her scream. Yet across counties, parents began locking their doors tighter, whispering that Ocala was no longer safe, that someone, somewhere, was taking girls. Carol played the last voicemail over and over again, Lori's voice laced with static and sunlight, saying she'd be home by dark. But darkness had come, and Lori never did. Months passed, then years, and the scalding questions never cooled, only hardened into quiet desperation. In 1981, a man named Curtis Ray Biggs took a late-night shift at an all-night truck stop off I-75, just a county south. He claimed that a woman with hollow eyes and sunburned shoulders stumbled in one evening, asking for coffee and directions to nowhere. She wore a ripped denim jacket with patches stitched haphazardly across its back. One of them, unmistakably, bore the talon-clutching skull of the Steel Vultures. She didn't blink much, he later told a reporter from the Ocala Star-Banner, like she'd forgotten how. But by the time he phoned the sheriff, she was gone, walked out into the velvet southern dark, headlights swallowing her shape. Investigators descended on the truck stop the next day, combing trash bins, rifling through receipts, scraping at ghosts. There were no fingerprints, no surveillance tapes, just smears of presence that led nowhere, like watermarks on old paper. The lead, like so many before, withered in bureaucratic heat, filed away beside dozens of still open cases. If that woman was Lori, she left behind no name, no cry, and no trail, only another echo in a case carved out of absence. But in late 1984, the silence cracked. A rusting evidence box, long forgotten in the back room of the Marion County Sheriff's Office, was re-examined by a rookie deputy named Alyssa Hartwell, fresh from the academy and obsessed with cold cases. What she found was easily dismissed by others: a Polaroid, curled with age, showing a grinning teenage girl on the back of a motorcycle, her face tilted just enough to catch the sun, just little enough to blur her features. In the background, a row of gas pumps and the signage of a now demolished rest stop. The photo had no date, no notes. But Alyssa couldn't shake the feeling that it mattered. She blew it up, sharpened the contrast, and stared at the threads of denim, the way the girl's wrist bent delicately like Lori's had in school yearbook photos. Most mysteriously, the man beside her, half laughing, half hidden by shadow, wore a leather vest bearing the faded Talon emblem. It was the steel vultures again. Pieces from a puzzle no one wanted to finish were starting to stir with life in the dust. And as Alyssa slid that photo under a fresh file marked Moss, L.J., she whispered it to herself once, then again like a spell. What if Lori never left the ride? Driven by a compulsion she didn't understand, Alyssa traced the gas station in the background of the photo to a long-defunct pit stop east of Bellevue, long since replaced by a strip mall and memories no one wanted. She drove there on a humid August morning, the kind where heat clings to skin like regret, and wandered the parking lot as if listening for echoes. She knocked on the glass of the nail salon that now stood over old oil stains, asking the owner, an old woman with cataract-clouded eyes, if she remembered what was there before. The woman nodded slowly, like the act pulled something loose inside her. Lots of bikes, she said. Too many sometimes. Girls too young, music too loud. And a man with half a face. Alyssa froze. The term matched an old biker nicknamed Split, a known Steel Vultures member whose mugshot had haunted Lori's cold case for years. Alyssa's heart beat louder, not from fear, but because she knew somehow that she had just stepped onto the shadow of Lori's disappearing trail. The deeper Alyssa dug, the more the past began to breathe. She filed FOIA requests, combed through dusty interagency notes, cross-referenced biker arrest logs with newspaper classifieds from the late 70s, searching for patterns others had missed. One night, buried in the microfilm archives of the Ocala Public Library, she found a clipping nearly lost to time, a brief police blotter report from April 25, 1978. Motorcycle disturbance reported off County Road 475, 2 females seen arguing with male riders. No further action. Filed. The location matched a curve in the road, only 10 miles from where Lori had last been seen. Alyssa printed it, her fingers trembling. 2 females. If Lori had not been alone, who was the other girl? And if they'd argued, had Lori changed her mind at the last second? Tried to leave, only to be silenced? The clipping gave no names, no confirmations. Just a timestamp, and a hint, one that suggested Lori's final hour may not have been one of quiet disappearance, but of struggle, a flicker of rebellion against the ride she once might have chosen, and the price she paid for second thoughts. The clipping ignited an obsession in Alyssa that she could no longer contain. Day after day, she mapped out that stretch of County Road 475, overlaying old topographic surveys with current satellite imagery. Trees had grown thicker, and roads had curved slightly over the years, but the topography still whispered secrets. She hiked the bend where the incident was logged, the asphalt now faded, the guardrails replaced, but something felt unchanged, as if the road itself remembered. A rusted soda can, half buried in soil, glinted beside a cracked matchbook marked with an insignia. A vulture mid-swoop. Probably coincidence, she told herself. But that same night, reviewing her notes again over the hum of cicadas, Alyssa noticed a chilling pattern. In the years surrounding Lori's disappearance, 3 other young women had been reported as missing within a 50-mile radius of Ocala, all hitchhikers. All last seen near county roads, and at least 2 had left behind, nothing but a whisper of engines and a glimpse of leather-clad men riding east into the dusk. The cases were never officially connected, scattered through different jurisdictions, different years, and different levels of urgency. But Alyssa saw the thread, fraying, but unmistakably woven. One flyer had shown a girl named Dana Reeves, age 19, vanished in 1976 after attempting to hitch a ride to Daytona Beach for a music festival. Another, Lisa Granger, a waitress from Summerfield, vanished on her way home from a late shift in 1979. Both had been described by last witnesses as getting into vehicles with chopper-like bikes trailing behind. Alyssa marked their dates on a timeline, looping them with colored string back to Lori's. The overlaps weren't just circumstantial, they pressed their weight into her chest like breath held too long. Could these be the hidden toll of a silent predator, one that rode the backroads in chrome and smoke? The pattern whispered of coordinated movement, not chaos. Of a predator wrapped not in shadow but in the roar of engines and the illusion of freedom. Alyssa's obsession soon demanded more than maps and archives. It demanded the voices of those still breathing. She tracked down Martha Kincaid, the now retired waitress who had filed the original report in the April 25th blotter. Martha lived in a faded clapboard home outside Anthony, surrounded by cats and silence. When Alyssa showed her the clipping, Martha blinked, then nodded once slow as memory and said, "She was scared, that girl. The quiet one. The other one, loud, like she'd dared fate. But the scared one, she had sky-colored eyes, begged to get away. Only reason I called the sheriff was I thought they were going to hurt her, and I didn't want no blood on my linens." Alyssa's breath caught. Lori's eyes had been described as morning sky after a storm in her missing persons report. Martha looked away, wiping her hands on her apron. Thing is, nobody ever came. Like the world just didn't care. The sun dipped low as Alyssa left the house, her recorder full of hesitant truths and half-born memories. One thing grew certain in her heart, a terrible certainty with weight like thunder. Lori Moss had not vanished without a sound. Her silence had been buried under indifference, muffled by exhaust, and forgotten in the noise. But it wasn't until a battered voice message was discovered in a forgotten evidence drawer, an analog cassette recorded by a state trooper in 1986, that Alyssa's investigation pierced the veil between speculation and horror. The tape had been labeled simply, Incident 24B, Noonan's Lake. Scratchy and sun-bleached. The trooper's voice was faint under the hiss of wind, but unmistakable. Female found inconsolable near mile marker 102. Refused to give full name. Mentioned someone named Lori. Said she was still riding, still can't get off. Displayed signs of trauma. Transported to Gainesville General, but left before intake. Alyssa's chest tightened as the tape clicked and whirred to its bitter end. Noonan's Lake was just 40 miles northeast of Ocala, and the date on the recording was brutal in its proximity, April 24th, 1986, exactly 8 years and 1 day after Lori disappeared. The repetition of the ride, the impossibility of escape, echoed like prophecy. Who was the woman in distress? Was she another survivor? Or was she Lori, trying to send a message through the static haze of years? Alyssa stared into the grain of the old cassette, the scream between the lines pressing closer, begging to be heard. The scream, it turned out, had been heard but dismissed. Buried in a forgotten intake log at Gainesville General lay the name Jane Doe 42, with a single scribbled note. Transient, agitated, declined follow-up, scars consistent with past restraint. Alyssa pulled every record tied to that entry, and what emerged was a sketch of a woman trapped between the fringes of memory and nightmare. No fingerprints had matched any known records. No family came forward, but a nurse still working at the hospital nearly 4 decades later remembered her. She kept repeating something, the nurse whispered when Alyssa found her at a break room table beneath humming fluorescents. Said she was still on the ride. Said someone named Lori never got off. That phrase haunted Alyssa, carving itself into her marrow. The ride. A symbol not just of motorcycles and movement, but of entrapment, trauma, and cycles unbroken. And suddenly, she saw it not just as a mystery, but a legacy, a chain of pain stretching back to Lori's last twilight walk on Highway 301. And perhaps, if the chain could be broken, one girl's silence could become a roar. Weeks after discovering the Jane Doe report, Alyssa's investigation exploded into something that could no longer be confined to margins and manila folders. A former Steel Vultures member, now under house arrest in Alabama, agreed reluctantly and under immunity to speak with investigators. His name was Ronald Wire Devlin, and his knuckles were tattooed with rust-colored ink. Alyssa flew there in mid-September, adrenaline flooding her veins as she sat across from him. When she showed him Lori's photo and the sharpened Polaroid, he blinked, a flicker of recognition tightening his jaw. Then came the words she hadn't dared to hope for. Yeah, she was with us. Didn't stay long, though. The air collapsed inward. Devlin described a girl who rode for 3 days with the pack, slept poorly, asked questions no one answered, and cried when engines started. He swore she left alive on her own somewhere outside Lake City. But the way he said it, the way his eyes dropped, suggested something darker. Not all rides end at home, he muttered. And when Alyssa asked what happened next, he only shook his head and whispered, some roads loop back on themselves. Whether Lori had escaped or vanished deeper into the myth, no one knew. But one truth emerged from the whispers and dust. Lori Jean Moss hadn't disappeared into silence. Her story had echoed, fractured, and curled through time like threads of smoke. And now, after decades in shadow, it was finally seen, frightening, fragile, and unfinished. As media outlets caught wind of Alyssa's findings, the long cold case of Lori Jean Moss flickered back into public view, igniting both outrage and renewed grief. News vans returned to Highway 301, old reporters now gray-haired revisiting a story they'd once buried beneath newer horrors. Carol Moss, now in her 70s and slowed by age but sharpened by sorrow, gave one final interview from her porch swing where the sun crawled slowly across the cracked boards. She held Lori's photo, still curled at the edges, faded but stubborn. People thought she just went wild, Carol said, voice a tremor caught between anger and ache. But she didn't disappear. She was erased, covered over by tire tracks and stories nobody wanted to connect. Over her shoulder, wind rustled through the Spanish moss hanging in long, ghostly veils. Somewhere, beneath decades of silence and asphalt, one name echoed louder than ever: Lori. And though the truth had unraveled slowly, painfully, and incompletely, it had begun to breathe again, not as closure, but as reckoning. The ride hadn't ended. It had only begun to be understood. In the months that followed, a task force was formally reopened under the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, spurred by public pressure and bolstered by Alyssa's relentless documentation. They called it Project Long Ride, a haunting name whispered by reporters and investigators alike. It unearthed more than expected. Testimonies from former gang affiliates, battered diaries from groupies turned survivors, and bones, long buried near lonely stretches of road between Ocala and Jacksonville. Some matched missing girls. Some didn't. One was found clutching a necklace with the letters LJM etched into worn silver. When Carol Moss was shown the image, her fingers trembled, but she only said, her daddy gave her that when she turned 16, said it was to remind her who she was, no matter where she went. It wasn't closure. It wasn't certainty, but it was something. For the first time in decades, Lori Jean Moss was no longer a ghost in the mirror or a whisper in the throttle. She was part of a reckoning, one that might finally force the forgotten to be remembered, and the ride so long cloaked in roar and ruin to finally, mercifully, end. But perhaps the most haunting detail came not from a file, a photo, or a voice on tape, but from a young woman named Cassidy Nolan, a former runaway who surfaced at a Tallahassee shelter in late 1989. She spoke of years spent inside a roving biker enclave called the Reaper's Moon, often overlapping with figures later tied to the shadow remains of the Steel Vultures. Cassidy remembered a girl they called Sky, quiet, thin, always watching the horizon like she was waiting for a door to open in the clouds. She had this necklace with little silver letters, Cassidy said. Didn't talk much, just rode. But when someone new joined, she warned them, always the same way. Don't let the ride take you too far. I didn't mean to stay. Nobody knew where Sky went after 1987. She disappeared the way Lori had while the engines still idled. Names change, hair color shifts, memories blur, but the silver around her neck had letters etched in it. L, J, M. Cassidy never forgot, not because she knew who Sky was, but because her warning was stitched with heartbreak. And perhaps the final answer lay not in hard evidence or confession, But in that warning, soft as wind, sharp as loss, the ride, once mistaken for freedom, had become a prison paved by silence, rumor, and denial, and the girls pulled into its orbit kept vanishing, until someone, at last, stopped chasing shadows and started listening to them. In late autumn of 1991, nearly 13 years after Lori Jean Moss vanished into that shimmering veil of Florida dusk, a roadwork crew clearing space near County Road 475 unearthed an object caked in red clay and memory. It was a rusted buckle, its leather strap deteriorated, its carvings faint but distinct. A bird in descent, talons extended. Authorities dismissed it as coincidence, but Alyssa Hartwell came in person, knelt in the dirt, and gently cradled it with gloved hands. Weeks later, forensic tests would confirm trace remnants of skin cells embedded in the buckle's creases, too degraded for identification, but undeniably human. It wasn't enough to name, to close, or to convict. But the symbol, the location, the timing, they told a story. And as Alyssa stood beneath the ache of a winter sky, she realized some roads never forget. They hold the echoes of girls who tried to outrun fate and fell into the silence between throttle and scream. The ride didn't just take them far. It swallowed them whole. But now, at least, someone was following the tread marks back not for vengeance, but for truth. Because the girls had names, they had voices, and in the cold dawn of reckoning, those voices had begun, at last, to rise. By the spring of 1992, a mural appeared on the southern wall of a crumbling diner just off Highway 301, painted in aching strokes of blue and silver by a retired teacher whose niece had vanished in 1980. At its center, a girl caught mid-turn, one arm outstretched, hair caught in some invisible wind, eyes soft but searching. Above her head, a ribbon of road curved into the sky, disappearing beyond clouds and memory. Below her feet, a name had been brushed in careful trembling black. Lori Jean Moss. Locals started leaving tokens there, a prom corsage, a motorcycle key, a cassette tape labeled Free Bird. It didn't matter whether all the truths had been uncovered. What mattered was that the silence had shattered. That girls like Lori were no longer ghosts behind handlebars, no longer cries left unheard against the hiss of engines retreating. Her name, once whispered through fear, had become a call through history not just to remember, but to reckon. And under Florida's bleeding sunsets, the ride that had once stolen voices now carried them forward. Relentless, resonant, unfinished. 30 years later, in the spring of 2008, a high school senior named Eliana Torres stood in front of that mural, sketchbook in one hand, tears in her eyes. She had found Lori's story not in textbooks, but in fragments, graffiti under bridge crossings, whispers from her grandmother, a blog run by someone named Echo, Rider 87, filled with broken timelines and ghosted names. Eliana was writing a thesis on memory and myth, but it had become something else entirely. She placed a folded letter at the mural's base that read, "You didn't vanish, you were erased. I see you." For her, Lori wasn't a legend lost in throttle and dusk. She was the girl who blinked at the moment the ride began, who hesitated, who was stolen. Eliana traced the painted ribbon of road until it disappeared into sky, and in that silence she felt something stir, not just grief, but promise. A chain had begun to shatter. Stories once buried beneath roar and ritual were rising, fragment by fragment, name by name. Lori's ride had not ended. It had become a path others could follow, their voices no longer swallowed, but carried. And just maybe, one day, every lost girl might find her way home. By 2025, the name Lori Jean Moss had become more than headline or cold case statistic. It had become a symbol. In classrooms, her story was taught alongside those of civil rights martyrs and wartime heroes, an emblem of how silence can kill and how remembrance can resurrect. Documentaries aired around anniversary dates. New podcasts reopened threads left dangling in official records, and advocacy networks grew from the roots of her tragedy. A scholarship was founded in her name at Ocala High, for girls pursuing forensic science. Alyssa Hartwell, now in her 50s, stood at its inaugural ceremony reading Lori's final known words from that last voicemail. "Be home by dark." The phrase was engraved at the edge of the podium, not as a promise kept, but as a warning we should never forget. Because home, for too many, remains just out of reach, flashing through clouds of dust on some endless, lonely road. And until every missing voice is lifted from the dark, Lori's ride does not end. It rides within us, loud as thunder, soft as memory, impossible to ignore. It is late summer now, and the mural on Highway 301 has begun to fade in places where the heat eats away at color. But new brushstrokes appear every season, touches from strangers, artists, daughters, survivors, each one a pledge that Lori's name will not recede. Somewhere, a teenage girl ties her shoelaces before hitching a ride, unaware of the specters who ride beside her in unseen spaces. Somewhere else, a cold case folder is reopened, because someone remembered a name scrawled on a rest stop wall, or heard the whisper of the word sky after years of forgetting. These are not endings, nor even beginnings. They are the slow unraveling of a veil, worn too long, over truth. And as long as girls vanish into the roar of empty promise, and as long as the wind carries their names beyond the reach of headlights, Lori Jean Moss will ride with them not as a myth, not as a warning, but as a voice now too loud to be silenced. The ride continues, but now, so do we. And so it is that along the ghost-traced curves of Florida's forgotten highways, the story of Lori Jean Moss no longer drifts as mere folklore. It lives rooted in the ache of those who loved her, rising from the resilience of those who carried her memory when justice forgot. Her name now marks maps, curricula, museums of the missing. But more than that, it echoes within a culture learning, too slowly but undeniably, to listen. Lori's tale was never just about motorcycles or a single vanished girl. It was about the countless whose lives were erased by systems indifferent to female fear, whose cries were buried beneath chrome and charm and the illusion of velocity. The ride isn't over. It never really was. But now, as dusk returns to Highway 301 and light slants across faded paint and promise, something different moves in the wind. Memory. Reckoning. The breath of girls once lost, now finding their way back, one story at a time. In a quiet corner of the Florida Museum of Human Rights, beside exhibits of vanished eras and voices once silenced, a single glass panel holds Lori Jean Moss's necklace, its silver dulled but defiant. Visitors peer in, read the plaque etched beneath. Recovered near County Road 475. Some names are never truly lost. Children ask who she was. Teachers pause a beat too long before answering. And in that pause, something vital is passed on, not facts, but something deeper. The will to remember. The ride Lori unwittingly joined belongs now to history, yes, but also to legacy. It warns and it teaches, and above all, it insists on truth, on presence, on never letting the shine of myth erase the tenderness of who was taken. Lori was not perfect, nor prophetic. She was simply a girl 17, barefoot at the edge of freedom, who met fate in the shape of thunder. And though the engines are quieter now, and the asphalt more worn, her voice fragile, resilient, and irrevocably hers still hums beneath every tire that turns, and every story that begins with the words, "She was last seen." And so, on the threshold between the remembered and the unknown, Lori Jean Moss becomes more than a girl on a highway. She becomes a beacon. Her story, long buried beneath exhaust and silence, now fuels conversations in classrooms, inspires new investigations, stains the conscience of institutions once deaf to desperate voices. She is the echo in every missing poster, the soft defiance in every survivor's recounting, her unfinished ride transformed into a pathway for justice, winding through time with each step of remembrance. There will always be roads like Highway 301, shimmering in heat and danger, and there will always be girls, bold or broken, chasing something they cannot name, but now, they will not ride alone. Lori rides with them in memory, in warning, and in an urgent, unrelenting whisper. See me, hear me, find me. In the end, Lori Jean Moss remains where she has always been, not lost, not gone, but waiting in the blurred place between remembrance and revelation. Her story lingers like asphalt heat after sunset, like the mournful cry of an engine fading into trees. Not every question was answered, not every ghost laid to rest. But her voice, soft, defiant, and finally heard, helped unveil a hidden history carved into backroads and shadows. The ride may not bring her home, not in the way loved ones once dreamed, but it has carried her to something else. Witness. She is more than a face in an old photograph. More than a missing girl beneath a headline. She is the start of a reckoning, a flame lit at the side of every road where silence once ruled. And as long as wheels turn and wind moves through the veins of memory, Lori rides not into erasure, but into the light. Her light now glows not just at roadside memorials or behind museum glass, but within the marrow of every effort to make the missing visible, to make the lost unforgotten. A new generation carries Lori's story forward, unafraid to speak the unspeakable, to confront the silences too long endured. Across Florida, annual remembrance rides draw survivors and searchers alike, leather and lace blending over miles paved in tribute and testimony. Teenagers in Ocala classrooms read her name alongside case files and archival tape, and some become detectives, artists, advocates, because they cannot let go of the girl who never came home. Everywhere, Lori's image flickers in murals, podcasts, campus walls, a symbol not of tragedy alone, but of transformation. When a girl's absence rewrote how we see every open road, every choice, every silence, the ride goes on, but not into oblivion. Now it rides toward reckoning, echoing through time with every mile traveled in search of truth. Lori Jean Moss did not vanish. She endured. And because she did, her story endures too. So the question no longer lies in whether Lori Jean Moss was taken by a motorcycle gang, or if she vanished willingly into the tempest of youth and rebellion. The truth braided through her story is deeper, more insidious, that freedom, when laced with danger and myth, can seduce and consume without mercy. Florida's sun-drenched highways will always carry the gleam of escape, the hum of possibility. But now, they also carry the burden of memory. Lori is not just a symbol, or a casualty, or a cold case cracked half open. She is a mirror held to the face of a society that too long ignored the girls who disappeared when the engines roared. Her ride, though stolen, left tracks sacred, scarred, unforgotten. And in those fading tire marks, we finally see not the end of her story, but its beginning. Where she rode, truth follows, and where truth rides, silence cannot survive. Morning light spills through the trees along Highway 301, where the asphalt still hums, indifferent to the stories woven into its grain. There is no monument grand enough to mark all the missing, no verdict clean enough to make sense of years swallowed by silence. But what endures is not closure, it's the choice to remember. Lori Jean Moss, 17 and sun-kissed on the edge of freedom, has become more than a vanished face. She is a question we still ask, a name that refuses to disappear, a call stitched into the very roads that once betrayed her. The ride continues, yes, but it is no longer one of denial and forgetting. It is a pilgrimage back through myth toward meaning, toward justice, toward the fragile hope that the next girl will be seen before the silence takes her. Lori's story doesn't end on that highway. It rides, tireless, toward truth. And wherever that road leads, we follow. In the hush between thunder and silence, Lori Jean Moss becomes every unheard voice, every mother's unanswered prayer, every road that winds into shadow. Her story bleeds into the tapestries of countless others, not as a singular tragedy, but as a chorus of warning and awakening. That April evening in 1978 did not mark the end of a life, it marked the beginning of a reckoning, one still blooming across decades and counties and generations. She walks now beside every girl who dares to choose her freedom, with hope in her throat and danger brushing at her heels. And though Lori never made it home by dark, her light has become the lantern along the path for those still searching. The engines have quieted, but the truth roars louder than ever, and as long as memory stirs and names are spoken, the ride of Lori Jean Moss cannot end. It rides toward justice. It rides toward home. Years from now, long after headlines fade and murals weather into washed-out hues, the story of Lori Jean Moss will still echo in the strange stillness that clings to dusty roads and roadside motels. It will live not because of verdicts or forensic breakthroughs, but because stories like hers, carved into the bones of a place, cannot be buried. Somewhere, a girl will feel a shiver she cannot name before accepting a ride from a stranger. Somewhere else, a mother's heart will twist at the static-laced ring of a phone. And in those moments, Lori's name, though unspoken, will whisper between heartbeats. Her story endures not because it was solved, but because it became a compass guiding us not toward neat conclusions, but toward compassion, vigilance, and remembrance. The ride she never finished has become ours. And with every mile we carry her memory forward, we promise this: she was not erased in vain. She rides with us still, through every truth pursued, every silence broken, and every lost soul whose name we refuse to forget. And so, with every sun-bleached billboard, every backroad curve shadowed by pine, the name Lori Jean Moss continues to echo not in screams nor myths, but in the steadfast thrum of remembrance. Her story is etched into the spirit of those unwilling to let the forgotten stay buried, into every investigator who reopens a file condemned to silence, into every young woman taught that freedom does not mean invisibility. The highways of Florida no longer sing only of rebellion and escape. They carry the weight of all who disappeared when no one was watching. Lori's was not a tale of disappearance. It was a reckoning, a heavy truth that rolled through decades on chrome wheels and unanswered questions. It ends where it began, on the edge of a road, in the last slanting hour of daylight, with a choice to look back, to listen, and above all, to never let the ride swallow the girl whole again. Lori rides still not behind handlebars, but within our will to see, to speak, to never forget. And perhaps that is how Lori Jean Moss endures in the choice we now make, again and again, to turn toward her memory rather than away. She lives in the spaces where justice smolders, but won't die, where stories long suppressed begin to breathe. The ride didn't erase her, it revealed us. Who we failed to protect, what we blinded ourselves to, what we owe. Her name is no longer a cold file or cautious footnote. It is a vow carried on every Florida wind, whispered through pine and paint and asphalt. Lori Jean Moss vanished on a spring evening decades ago, but she never truly disappeared. She broke open a silence, and through it, we hear the echoes of every girl still riding, still lost, still waiting, still burning like sun on blacktop. And for as long as memory travels, so too will Lori, not as a victim left behind, but as a sentinel leading the way forward, her voice humming clear, defiant, unending. In time, Lori's story grew beyond even its own borders, stitched into murals in towns she'd never seen and recited in candlelit vigils thousands of miles from the Florida roads she vanished upon. She became a symbol not only of loss, but of endurance, a name spoken in legislative halls pushing for better protections, engraved on bracelets around the wrists of those who refuse to forget. And though we may never know every detail of what happened on that April evening, one truth now cuts through the haze with clarity. Lori Jean Moss was not forgotten. She was resurrected by love, by persistence, by those brave enough to chase shadows until they turned into light. Her ride, once dragged through myth and silence, now roars with purpose across generations. And in that sound, fragile yet defiant, the echo of a girl once lost becomes a promise held by all who remember. If we carry her story forward, with open hearts and unflinching eyes, then the ride, the one that tried to erase her, finally, blessedly, ends. So let this be the final mile the ride that once devoured silence, now ending not with vengeance, but with a vow to remember. In the arc of Lori Jean Moss's journey, we find a map not of death but of awakening, a path drawn in memory and unresolved hope. Her story is a safeguarding prayer whispered beneath the engine's thrum, a name that will not yield to time, to rust, or to forgetting. Every girl who walks the roads alone now walks with her story beneath her ribs, shielded by the rhythm of a question that will not die. Where did she go? Who let her vanish? And how loud must we shout to make the world notice again? Lori did not vanish without trace. She became the trace, an indelible line across the conscience of a country still learning to value every voice, especially the quiet ones who once stood at the roadside, waiting. The ride ends here, but the memory carries on, brave and burning. And as the wind carries dust across the sunstruck pavement of Highway 301, where silence once ruled and stories went untold, Lori Jean Moss remains not in the shadows where they tried to bury her, but in the light we now refuse to turn away from. Her ride, once tragic and half-spoken, has become a reckoning etched into the American memory, a reminder that every vanishing has weight, that every silence costs. No longer a lost girl on a lost road, Lori is the voice that broke through chrome-coated myths and machine-fed oblivion. Her name lives wherever justice stirs, wherever truth is hard but necessary, wherever someone refuses to let the road end in forgetting. The ride does not continue. It concludes not in answers, but in witness. And with that, Lori is home not in place, but in presence, eternal, untaken. The road is quiet now, but because of her, we are not. And this is how the road tells her story, not in static or fading headlines, but in the murmured resolve of a world that finally chose to remember her. Lori Jean Moss, once lost to heatwave and hush, now stands immortal in the fragile architecture of remembrance. Her name challenges silence, calls out false freedom, and marks the space where justice must stand and answer. She is not a ghost. She is not a symbol carved in grief. She is the living testament to every girl who dared to wander, who fought to return, and who now, through her memory, walks with a shield of story. The ride ends, yes, but only so that those who follow walk with eyes wide open. Beneath every mile of sun-bleached concrete and every stretch of lonesome dusk, Lori rides no longer in fear, but in flame. And we witnesses, mourners, truth-bearers, we carry her light forward, where the road meets reckoning, and silence finds its voice at last. And so, at the edge of that dusk-lit road where it all began, let the final truth settle like falling ash that Lori Jean Moss, long presumed forgotten, has become more than a vanished girl in the threads of history. She is the unfinished sentence in every plea for justice, the heartbeat in every file once left unopened. No verdict was delivered. No frame-perfect ending sealed her fate, but her echo has been louder than silence. It has changed laws, opened eyes, ignited movements. And in the quiet, where engines once roared and promises turned to smoke, there is now a name carried with reverence. Lori. Not as a question, but as an answer fierce, unwavering, eternal. When we say her name now, it is not in mourning but in motion. A vow that no girl walks unknown ever again. The road does not forget, nor do we. And in that sharp, soft place where memory meets meaning, Lori Jean Moss rides no more. She rests, witnessed, loved, home. So let the road still warm from yesterday's sun be her monument. Let every wind-scraped sign and every mile of cracked concrete carry her name like a hymn. Because Lori Jean Moss was never just a girl who vanished, she was a mirror held to our failings, and now, a symbol of how stories can be lost and found again through the sheer gravity of remembrance. This is the ride's true end, not in silence, but in vigil. In the thousands who now look twice at the side of the road. In the mothers who teach their daughters not just caution, but legacy. In the investigators who chase down cold trails with fire in their bellies. Lori's journey marked us. Her presence lingers, not behind exhaust fumes, but in the unwavering insistence that no story is too old, no voice too faint, no girl too forgotten. As long as her name is spoken with love, with sorrow, with hope, Lori Jean Moss is no longer missing. She has been found, over and over again, in the memory of us all. And at last, beneath the long breath of the Florida dusk, with the orange sky fading into twilight's hush, the legend of Lori Jean Moss returns to something deeper than folklore truth imbued with memory. Her story, carried on the backs of wind and worn photographs, becomes not the tragedy that swallowed her youth, but the shelter that now protects others from vanishing unmarked. Road signs may rust, murals may fade, and voices may falter, but her name will echo still in each cautious step, each reopened file, each vow to never let the ride go unanswered. Lori did not come home by dark, but we brought her into the light, and in doing so, we made a promise that she and all those like her will never ride unnoticed again. She is not only found, she is kept. Kept in voice. Kept in justice. Kept in us. And so the wheels slow, the road stretches quiet, and the echo that began as a cry in the rearview now ends as a chapter etched in permanence. Lori Jean Moss became more than a mystery, more than a teenage girl lost to the churn of myth and machinery. She became the call to never look away. From a sliver of highway draped in golden heat, she sparked a legacy that reshaped how we grieve, search, and tell the stories of the gone. Hers was an unfinished sentence that we, as a collective remembering, have now chosen to complete, not by closing the book, but by keeping it open in vigilance. This is the end, yes, but it is also the vow that begins at every roadside vigil, every detective's second glance, every voice that dares to say the names others forgot. Lori is not a whisper anymore. She is the road beneath us, the sky above us, and the light that ensures the next vanished girl is seen before silence takes her. The ride ends here. But her story rides on. Forever.